a long day of testimony from law enforcement officers, most importantly, a detective in this case, one of the detectives who interviewed one of the defendants, Gregory McMichael, and the lawyers went back and forth. His basic account for the jury is what Gregory McMichael said in the first interview that he gave, first formal interview that he gave to law enforcement, and it was an important day of testimony, marred in many ways by a lot of objections and squabbling and scrapping by the lawyers. However, let's turn now to a conversation on the wider impact of Ahmaud Arbery's death and what this trial means when it comes to a discussion of race relations in this country. And we're happy to be joined by civil rights attorney Nekima Levy Armstrong. Nekima, thanks very much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Well, as I said, this is really why we're here. It's why a lot of people got interested in this case. Simply the facts of it, a young man just running through a neighborhood, jogging, just out for a run. He loved running, everybody said. He was running through a neighborhood. Turned out to be the wrong neighborhood because three white men saw him, suspected him of being a criminal, of being part of some burglaries that they were concerned about in the neighborhood. And they got in their pickup trucks and drove him down, and he ended up dead. And that's why we're here. Inevitably in this case is the specter of race. We're only in day 3 of this trial. We've already seen plenty of terrible, gut-wrenching video evidence of the incident. So how does this kind of high-profile and controversial case like this affect the community, a small community like the one where it happened in Georgia?
Well, this case is traumatic for those of us who can identify with Ahmaud Arbery's family. Of course, historically, there have been many circumstances in which white men have hunted down black men. They have been lynched in the past. They've been shot. We've had black men dragged on the back of a pickup truck. And I would say in most recent history, this reminds me in particular of what happened to Trayvon Martin in terms of having a so-called vigilante, someone trying to be neighborhood watch, following a young black man who's unarmed, and then using their privilege in order to justify shooting someone who really is just minding their own business. And so this is very triggering.
Please go on. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Oh, no, go ahead. I was just going to say this is very triggering for many of us in the black community, and I'm sure the folks in the town where Ahmaud Arbery lived and where his family still lives. It's a painful reminder of our unreconciled racial history in this country and the fact that we are still dealing with white supremacy and vigilante justice, and typically a lack of accountability when these things happen.
And that's what we're looking at here. Thank you. And what I was going to say is I'm embarrassed to say I hadn't thought of the Trayvon Martin parallel, that essentially what we're dealing with here, at the heart of this case, what the jury will be asked to decide is, was it reasonable for these men to suspect Ahmaud Arbery of being a criminal? And really the only thing they had to go on is that the suspect that had been identified in that neighborhood was a black man. It turns out the video evidence, he looked nothing like the man who is suspected of committing a couple of burglaries there. But the jury here will be asked to decide whether that was a reasonable thought. And there has been anger over the makeup of this jury. 11 white jurors, 1 black juror. What does that say to you about the fairness of this case?
Well, it says that we still have a long way to go in terms of rectifying a lot of the injustices inherent within our system. There is no reason or rationale that jury should have been comprised of 11 white people and 1 black person, given that the pool that they had narrowed it down to was much more racially inclusive. And so just like the judge said, I do believe that there's some evidence of discrimination. Unfortunately, the judge didn't see that fact as being compelling enough to reseat some of the black jurors who were unnecessarily dismissed. And again, this is a problem that happens time and time again in courtrooms all across America, where there are all white juries who decide the fate, typically of black folks. But in this case, all white juries are deciding the fate of white vigilantes. This also reminds me of Emmett Till. That's another painful story from our history of a young Black man, unarmed, who was murdered by white vigilantes, and there was no accountability under the law.
Because it is about justice for the victim and the victim's family here. And Ahmaud Arbery's family, as you say, has been present in court since arguments began on Friday. There we see his mother. And I've covered murder trials, and of course, your heart just breaks for the family of a victim because of all that they have lost. And here, once again, as you're describing, there's a special burden, it seems to me, for Black families because it's so utterly senseless what was, even whatever the verdict turns out to be, it's clear that their boy, their son, he's a grown man, but of course you're a parent, you'll always see your child as a little one. He died because he's Black that's inevitable, however the jury decides this case. That's what happened here. So what does a family, how does a family go through that additional trauma?
I think that the toll that they are being expected to bear is really unbearable at the end of the day. Not only are they experiencing the loss of a loved one, but they're having to relive this moment in court and in front of national and international audiences because it's being televised. They have to sit in court and listen to the evidence unfold, listen to the testimony, hear the callous disregard for Ahmaud Arbery's life that was demonstrated by the defendants in this case. They have to see photographs that are very graphic, as well as video footage that is triggering and traumatizing. It is too much to have to put Black families through this additional trauma simply because some people do not like Black folks because of the color of their skin. And they see us as criminals, no matter what you're doing, jogging, walking down the street, eating Skittles and drinking iced tea, allegedly whistling at a white woman. I mean, all of those things have led to a death sentence at the hands of vigilantes here in this country. It's unacceptable, it's intolerable, and it needs to change.
Amen. I mean, it is really a central part of the story of America that we are still living. And since Ahmaud Arbery's death, almost 2 years ago now, in February 2020, we have seen more instances of racial injustice, of racial violence in this country. When it comes to talking about race and working towards effective solutions for all of us, because an injustice done to one is an injustice done to all, in our justice system, how do you think we can make progress?
Well, I think one of the ways that we can make progress is realizing that we have to tackle the issue of race and racial injustice head on. For some reason, we have trouble addressing the issue of race. I mean, right now, there's a debate in this country about the efficacy of critical race theory, whether it makes white children feel uncomfortable. But white children are the very children who need to understand what has happened historically. They need to understand the impacts of white supremacy and racial discrimination and the targeting of Black folks that has happened historically in this country and the impacts that continue to persist. How are we going to break the cycle if we're unwilling to have these conversations? I also think that, oh, go ahead.
No, sorry, please.
I was just going to say, with Gregory McMichael being a former police officer, that also indicates that there are flaws within that system. If you have someone who's been trained, they are supposed to protect and serve. He was still working within the criminal justice system. He absolutely should have known better, and he should be held to a much higher standard. But that gets to the larger issue of bias in our society, bias in police forces, and the role that it plays in the harm that is done to Black folks like Ahmaud Arbery and to the Black community at large when we have to experience this kind of trauma over and over.
And as I say, it just continues to harm our country as a whole. Obviously, Black people are suffering, but that kind of suffering is the thing that poisons body politic right through and through. And on that note, what do you think progress means for the Black community? Do you see it? You wrote an op-ed for the New York Times recently, which we saw, with the headline, "Black voters want better policing, not posturing by progressives." Now, that's a challenge. to progressive. What do you mean by that? Black voters want better policing.
Well, one of the things that's important to understand is that in our community, we want to ensure that if we have to call 911 in the case of an emergency, that someone who's professional is going to show up. Someone who's culturally competent is going to show up. Someone who sees our humanity is going to show up. And when those officers show up in ways that abuse our rights, our privileges, and our bodies, we expect for them to be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. That has not happened historically. We are just now in recent years beginning to see more officers prosecuted who have killed people and who have violated people's rights. But we still have a long way to go in terms of addressing the systemic issues within policing. While at the same time, unfortunately, within the Black community, we experience a disproportionate rate of crime and homicides and violence. And for whatever reason in our society, we can't seem to grapple with the fact that for Black folks, we want the full rubric of what public safety should look like. We shouldn't have to choose between having bad cops and dealing with crime in our community, or not having cops at all and dealing with crime in our community. We should be able to feel safe in our community. We should be free from community violence. We should be free from police violence. And if we're going to address these issues and take the concerns of Black folks seriously, then we have to listen to Black people. Too often, those who are in positions of power, including Democrats and those who identify as progressives, make decisions for us without including our voices, our perspectives, and our experiences in the equation. That's what we saw happen in Minneapolis with the recent ballot measure. And that's why Black folks overwhelmingly voted down that ballot measure that would have dismantled the Minneapolis Police Department and replaced it with a new Department of Public Safety that had no plan attached to it. And so we were concerned about what kind of additional jeopardy would we be putting our community in if a plan is created and there are no specifics regarding what that's going to look like.
So much work to do, and we all can put our shoulders to the wheel, as we know you do. And so, Nekima Levy Armstrong, we thank you very much for joining us today and helping us kind of take a look at these issues, and we thank you for the work you do on them.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.